is Lindsay Johnson, and I am Head of Content here at Worldwide Clinical Trials. As biotech and emerging pharma companies proceed from startups to rapidly growing their operations and having the ability to shepherd an R&D asset through a pipeline and then to commercial success, many critical decisions must be considered. I had the opportunity to sit down with Bruno Gagnon to discuss some questions that they may encounter and how to handle them. Bruno, thank you for joining me today. Do you mind just starting off by sharing some information about your current role with Eidos?
Hi, this is Bruno Gagnon. I'm Senior Vice President of Development Operations at BridgeBio and also at Eidos Therapeutics. So Eidos is a company that is a subsidiary of BridgeBio, and my full-time job is really to head out operations at Eidos. And right now we are in a phase 3 clinical trial, so that's kind of what occupies most of my days.
Great, thank you. So my first question for you, what should a company insource versus outsource? Specifically, what information does a company need to make that decision, and how do they even begin the evaluation process?
That's a topic that is near and dear to my heart because before joining Eidos, I did a lot of consulting with small and emerging biotech companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that was one of the first questions that I would ask my clients. So basically, it's that balance between what you insource and what you outsource. And it's very specific to each company, but you need to look at who you have already. So based on the resources you have and the talent and the knowledge you have, you may want to complement with an outsourcing solution. For example, people who come with strong chemistry and discovery background, but they may not have the execution power. So in this case, you would probably want to outsource the execution, which could be clinical trial execution or even preclinical. But for every activity that you outsource, you also want to make sure that you have appropriate level of oversight, which is a very important regulatory expectation from ICH GCP guideline E6 R2, which will put a lot of emphasis on sponsor oversight. So even if you have a CRO and you've outsourced a lot of your activities, you want to have people who provide enough oversight and enough supervision of the activities that have been outsourced. So this way you can ensure quality. And this overall balance of insource versus outsource will evolve. As you become a more mature company, you may start bringing in more resources in-house because now you have less risk of failure as the compound moves from phase 1, 2, and 3. You have more and more chances that you will go to your filing with regulatory agencies. So at that point, you can shift the balance of outsourced activities to more in-source. So this is a dynamic process, but in the very beginning, it's good that you ask yourself these types of questions. So you put together the strategy regarding managing risk according to the people that you hire.
Awesome. I think that's so true. I especially loved how you talked about the balance you need to strike between in versus outsourcing and really how it changes over time. It's not just something to be looked at once. Another question I have for you is, what is the best way to approach key opinion leaders for their objective input?
Well, if you think about the overall drug development process, it starts very early. Key opinion leaders, for me, I think a lot about clinicians, people who are treating patients who have the disease that is of interest to you. The key to this is a very early engagement and a high touch point. So as an example, with Eidos, it took about 3 years for us to get to the point where we are right now, phase 3, which is particularly fast. But in the beginning, our contacts with the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, we did not even have results from first in human. And we started to go to conferences, or I call them, just introduce ourselves and say, this is the therapy that we are planning to put forward in terms of a drug development candidate. And very early, we're trying to get their opinion and their reaction on the technology we have, or in this case, the compound that we have, by explaining the mechanism of action and how our compound differentiates itself from others that are either already on the market or are being studied. So early engagement and then frequent engagement, which means any opportunity we have to meet with them, which includes face-to-face, we visit them at their own institutions, or we meet them at conferences, or we create opportunities. For example, forming a medical advisory board and asking them questions. So very early on, we had questions to our key opinion leaders as part of an ad board, and we were able to shape what is currently now our phase 3 protocol design. And as these programs move forward, it's very important for us to give them an update. At each time we had a milestone, for example, first time we had results from our phase 1 first in human studies, we shared with them. Then after that, when we started the phase 2 study, when enrollment completed or when we had results, we would share with them. And going back to the word balance, as we talked earlier, you still need to strike the right balance because you don't want to call them too often and start getting annoying. They're busy and they're working with other sponsors as well. So you want to stay top of mind and make sure that they hear from you on a regular basis, but at the same time, you don't overdo it, burn them out, and then they're kind of tired of hearing about you. So choose carefully the touch points, what the frequency, and what the type of information you want to share with them. But I would still go on the side of more often is better in this case, and the quality of these interactions also. So make sure you have content to share with them or questions for them that would require a special kind of intervention from your key opinion leaders. And I think we have a very strong relationship and rapport with our current key opinion leaders on our program. So I think we've done it the right way in terms of that balance.
Yes, that's really interesting. So one factor that emerging companies need to consider is their team. What are some benchmarks and tactics for recruiting and retaining top talent, particularly since employees or contractors tend to face those long hours and uncertainty about the viability of the company as time goes on?
So this question is still as current as it was 20 years ago. I started my first job as a manager about that time, 20 years ago, and I remember asking a very similar question to the person who was my hiring manager. During the interview process, I would say to her, how would we ensure that we can hire good people here? Because we knew it was competitive then and it's competitive now. And I remember some of the typical answers that people say, well, we want to take good care of our employees. We want to make sure they have fun in the office, they feel rewarded for the work, and people can throw all kinds of tactics. So people like coming in the office and they love the work environment. And some people have free protein bars in the office and stuff like that. And some of these things may appear silly because it's about how you create a good work environment. But the bottom line is if you have good science and product or compounds or clinical trial programs that make a difference for people, very often that's the first thing that people will see. I want to go work for a good company, not a company that gives you free stuff. And that comes also with retention, because once people are working hard, if they are getting to a point of fatigue, they even go work for another company. But you don't want to be doing this like 5 times in a period of, let's say, 7 to 10 years, because it's going to look bad. So people also realize that there's kind of some reward and benefits of staying longer with a particular employer. So that type of retention work can be done by making sure that people know what's coming next, like how does it fit in the big picture. People look at getting to the next milestone. I think it's a huge motivation to say, look, in the next 2 years, we will finish this program and we'll file with the FDA or other regulatory agencies for approval of our drug. Now, I want to see this through. People have a sense of pride and they say, I'm working on this program. I want to work all the way through the moment where we can get approval. So just by showing people a little bit where they fit and what are the next milestones, I feel that people are more likely to stay. So.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. The meaningful work is definitely what attracted me to this industry and is what I think people are looking for nowadays. Moving on to our next question, what are some key milestones a company can use to measure progress against executing their strategy?
Again, I'll tell you more about my focus, which is more execution, but I think on the entire spectrum of drug development, from early discovery all the way to post-approval activities, you have a lot of milestones, and I think a lot of them are standard in the industry. So let's focus on the clinical operation. For example, when you hit the IND, basically you know exactly what is needed to file an IND, and you should be able to plot this against time and say, by this time, you should be able to file the IND. And when you do that, you can say, boom, we are exactly 100% on time, or we're a little bit behind or ahead of schedule. So that's one big milestone. So from that will follow first-in-human clinical trials, and from that, completion of each of the phases. I think a lot of these things are easily measurable because linked with either a number of patients by a certain amount of time or a database that would be locked. Also, I think a very important milestone for all of us in this industry, especially in the drug development side, is end of phase 2 meeting. So whenever you have an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA or advice with European regulators, that's also a very good point, because by the time you say end of phase 2 is done, you have your phase 3 that can be agreed upon. After that, a lot of it will be regarding enrollment in your clinical trials. So the completion of enrollment in your phase 3 is a very big milestone. Again, a database lock. And ultimately, I would say when you're getting ready for filing an NDA or a BLA. That would be like a huge milestone. And the next one after that would become approval by the FDA and then launch of your product. So you can divide these in sub-milestones, and at the department level, this is how we very often would put together our own departmental goals and objectives, which can roll up into corporate goals, and some of these things become very public for public company. So these are the types of things I think you put in advance, you can commit to them, and when you actually achieve these goals, they're relatively easy to measure.
Excellent. And are there any other questions that you tend to receive from companies as they continue through the drug development journey?
Yeah, there's always the topics about how to make clinical trials that are more patient-friendly. The term we hear a lot is patient centricity or patient-focused clinical trials. So how do we make these clinical trials makes more sense from the perspective of the patient?
And how do you typically direct them on that topic?
Well, the key is have a conversation with the patients who are your ultimate customers. So currently I'm working on ATTR cardiomyopathy, which stands for transthyretin amyloidosis. We have a group of patients who suffer from heart failure due to this disease. And early on, we've been meeting with representatives of this population, and we've been asking them, what are your challenges every day? Like, what are the things that you would like to improve in your health? And with this information, you can have the perspective of the patient, and you can actually build a clinical trial that not only will meet the needs of the regulators, on top of the patient's perspective, then you can actually make a clinical trial that would be a little bit more patient-friendly. And we try to get their opinions on the number of either tests or procedures that are done during a clinical trial. So even the clinical trial design, such as having a placebo-controlled arm, these are the types of things where patients have a very strong opinion. And by having a dialogue with them, and it's not just one meeting, it's not just like a couple of phone calls, it's an ongoing dialogue with our key patient opinion leaders. Sometimes we call them POLs. At my company, at Eidos, we have a person, and her full-time job is patient advocacy relations. And we have this person meet on our behalf, or sometimes having meetings with the executive team at Eidos to get the input from patients. And we, in return, give them regular updates about the progress of our clinical trial programs, which we can try to keep them informed about the development of our compounds and how this could eventually make a difference in their lives. So it's not just us asking patients tell us their opinion, but we also need to show them how we are implementing some of their feedback. And the feedback that we cannot implement, we just need to be straightforward with them and explain that it's not always possible to implement every single suggestion that they have, but at least they understand why, and we try to be very transparent with them.
Those are great points. I'm so glad you brought up patient centricity, since it has been such a big topic of discussion right now. Now I want to switch gears a little and talk about your experience with CRO partnering. What organizational attributes would make an uncommonly great CRO partner?
Well, a lot of it is sharing goals and making sure that we're aligned on that. So when we're looking for a good organization, I would say you need to have an aligned philosophy, like corporate culture that fits well together. And then, so it starts very early with conversations at the executive level. And so what do we have? You need to have the same interest, like in, for example, rare disease or difficult to execute clinical trials. You start having these conversations early. Good level of transparency, shared goals, shared culture would be very much the foundation of this partnership. And you just feel like, wow, we are a good fit. Even be things such as what's your philosophy on risk management, setting goals, and performance. But that's how I think you get to know these are people that you would partner in a productive way. Start early by saying that this is the type of people I want to work with.
It is truly a partnership, so I agree that aligning on shared goals is an important step. So your company has worked with Worldwide in the past. Do you mind describing that partnership?
So my experience with Worldwide has been on a few different fronts, mostly on the preclinical aspect. But what I like about Worldwide is they are full-service CROs from early stage to late stage, and they have also experience in rare disease. So far, within the family of companies within BridgeBio, we have used the Worldwide as mostly a bioanalytical service provider, and we've done a lot of our PK/PD study. And the level of satisfaction has been very high because we continue to work with them. And the advantage of starting early with contract research organization is that sometimes when the company already knows you, they know a little bit your compound from the early stage, then you can move on to potentially other stages of clinical trials like a phase 2 or phase 3. And it's important to continue to evaluate and say if it's a good fit for further study, depending on what you're looking for in terms of therapeutic area, quality of the people at the company, and also the geographic coverage. Because of these rare disease clinical trials, you need to go where the patients are. So in some cases, the choice of country or the choice of geographic area where you enroll your clinical trial is linked with physicians who are seeing these patients. And then you need to evaluate if the CRO is a good fit for these particular areas. So I think with Worldwide is an imperative option for many rare diseases, and will continue to consider them for not just Eidos, but also other companies within the BridgeBio family.
That's great to hear. One last question for you today. What did you like most about working with Worldwide?
We had very good responsiveness. I would say people are very quick to get back to us with answers to our questions. And quality of the data, I said we've been using Worldwide for a more specific work that is specific to our assays, like for example with the pharmacokinetic. And so the quality of the data, the assays, and the science was very high.
That's wonderful. Well, I would like to thank you for sitting down to talk with me today for our Uncommon Conversations podcast.
You're welcome. That was my pleasure.